Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The USC commitment sweatshirt is back on as Lincoln Riley, USC, landing another commitment coming from the transfer portal, and former San Jose State wide receiver Charles Ross. And you make no mistake about it, this is a depth piece for this USC program. I do have to give Lincoln Riley a ton of credit in terms of the depth he's been able to build in this wide receiver room, where we came out of spring practice and nobody had a question mark about the talent in this USC wide receiver room. We know this USC wide receiver room is going to be one of the better wide receiver rooms we see in the country, but the depth really wasn't there. And I think it was a really tricky spot that Lincoln Riley was put into, where you have to go try to add depth at the wide receiver room while also having such a loaded wide receiver room with a ton of young talent. And you look at a lot of the transfers that you have to go after, a lot of guys are transferring out of their programs to find more playing time. And USC had to sell wide receivers to come to USC, but not really offer much playing time because of how loaded that wide receiver room was sitting after spring practice. And you take a look at some of the names they've added. Jay Fair, somebody that I am super high on coming from Auburn. Kyle Ford, obviously, coming back home. And now you add someone like Charles Ross and say, this USC wide receiver room, it's still extremely talented, but now you do have those depth pieces in place. Want to get into Charles Ross, but I think more importantly, I want to kind of dive into this wide receiver room and talk about why I am so high on this unit heading into 2024. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the USC fans. Y'all know I love talking this program, but the amount of support you guys continue to show to the fellas, all the fight-ons in the comment section, that stuff means the absolute world. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. I promise you, we cover every single transfer portal commitment for this USC program. If that means covering a depth wide receiver, that's absolutely what we're doing. Without further ado, let's get into Charles Ross, and formerly at Nevada, transferred to San Jose State. I think one thing that is a little bit intriguing about this addition is Lincoln Riley and this USC staff have firsthand experience with Charles Ross. He had his best game of his collegiate career against USC last year, went for 5 catches, over 60 yards. And when you take a look at the 2023 production, it is, certainly nothing to write home about, right? 26 catches for 347 yards, 1 touchdown. That plays a lot of his reps and snaps from that slot wide receiver spot. But a guy that, if you have to play him in a pinch, I think can be awfully reliable. Now, is he going to be in the 2 deep for this USC program? Probably not. I think that has a lot more to do with how loaded this USC wide receiver room is as opposed to Charles Ross. But you're getting a guy that's going into his 5th year of college football, has caught for over 800 yards during his collegiate career. You talk about adding depth. This is kind of exactly what it looks like. And for the USC fans, I did want to get just a little bit of a clip of Charles Ross, because I'll be the first one to say Charles Ross commits to USC. I had to go back and watch a little bit of Charles Ross. You get a little rep here against USC on 3rd and 10. And I'm talking about a reliable receiver that knows how to get open, get his head around the football. He's working in the slot here, coming back, using it. He looks big, right? 6'1", 175. And he looks like a big-bodied wide receiver, obviously picking up the first down. Now, the more important conversation that I would like to have is breaking down this USC wide receiver room. And we've talked a little bit about this wide receiver room, but the only really parts we've dove into is it's going to be a really good unit. Now, I think the question is, why is this USC wide receiver room going to be such a good unit in 2024? And I think it starts with, yes, the sheer talent that you have is certainly there. It is one of the most talented wide receiver rooms that you have in the country. More importantly, I think the skill set of this USC wide receiver room is extremely diverse. And so you have Lincoln Riley, arguably the best offensive-minded coach in the country, having all of these weapons, but more importantly, some of these weapons have so many different kind of skill sets. You start off with a guy like Zachariah Branch, who I think is probably the most electric player with the football in his hands in the entire country. This USC wide receiver and this USC offense, it's predicated on getting the football out quickly, on time to their playmakers in space. That is something that Miller Moss is going to do a very good job of. And you have a guy like Zachariah Branch that is going to make that extremely easy, whether it's end arounds, whether it's screens, whether it's shallow crosses. get the ball into Zachariah Branch's hands, and you're going to get some game-changing plays. So you have your guy in Zachariah Branch who is that difference maker in terms of the yards after the catch. Then you start looking at some of the matchup nightmares. You point to Deuce Robinson and Jacoby Lane, the guys that working vertically down the field. If you want to push the ball to that deeper third, a guy like Deuce Robinson over 20 yards per catch during his true freshman year, you have those guys. You have guys that safeties have to certainly respect in terms of what they can do working vertically. That's going to open stuff up for Zachariah Branch underneath. And you're going to hit some more explosive plays with guys like Deuce Robinson and Jacoby Lane working vertically down the field. Jacoby Lane, a guy that I think might be in line to have a monster season in 2024. It's completely revamped his body. He looks like a true wide receiver one. And then a guy that I feel like just gets slept on, maybe not by USC fans, but I think nationally, I think a lot of the conversation goes to Zachariah Branch. Obviously, with the highlight film we've seen from him, goes to a guy like Deuce Robinson because he was a 5-star coming out. You look at Mekhi Lemon, he might be my favorite wide receiver on this USC program, and he's not as fast as Zachariah Branch. He is not as big and physical as guys like Deuce Robinson and Jacoby Lane. But what Mekhi Lemon does is he just knows how to separate. Someone comped him to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I said Jordan Addison. I don't hate the Amon-Ra St. Brown comp either, because you look at why St. Brown was so good, why he's so good in the NFL. It is not necessarily because he's the biggest or fastest, but you're talking about a wide receiver that has elite traits in terms of route running, creating separation, and being that quarterback-friendly wide receiver. And that is, it's not as flashy to talk about like a guy like Zachariah Branch, but Mekhi Lemon is going to be a guy that's a difference maker for this USC program. And I'll say this too, true freshman Xavier Jordan, I don't know how much opportunity that he's going to get as a true freshman just by the nature of having such a loaded wide receiver room. From what you saw in the spring game, I loved him out of high school. Thought you saw the flashes in the spring game. That's a guy that also can contribute to this USC wide receiver room as well. So when I look at this wide receiver room, now that you have the depth in place, it's one of my favorite wide receiver rooms that you have in the country, not only because of that sheer talent, but the amount of different ways that this USC wide receiver room can attack opposing defenses heading into 2024. Fired up about it. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.